Hello, my name is Barton, and I wanted to give a speaking engagement on what's called resume writing and cover letters. The first thing that most people feel, they feel kind of out to sea and lost when they're looking for work, especially nowadays. But in truth, the best way to get yourself a job, if you don't have one, is to spend as much time looking for the job as you would be working. That would be your full-time job. And if you don't have if you already have a job and you're just wanting to transition, then you can offset the time by looking for a job that way. One of the things I did want to talk about, resumes became very popular in the 80s and on through present, but they have evolved. And the one thing you have to recognize, and some people may not have been around that time, but in the 80s, companies were allowed to ask you questions that they're not legally allowed to ask you today. And like your age, are you married, things like that. And the resumes back in the 80s that was required to show out all of your experience actually dated a person, and then you could estimate their age just from their resume. So what I wanted to address was effective resume and cover letter in a dynamic market, for which we have today. Have a seat. And identify what companies are looking for and how to use that to your advantage. So effective resume and cover letter. Cover letters pretty much nowadays go along hand in hand. But back in the 80s, they were really optional, if not even used. But today, they are. And what companies are looking for, you have to actually do research on the company. Every time you apply for a specific company or job, you should research that and see if you're a perfect fit, because their requirements listed is exactly what they want. And if you don't have those requirements, they're going to throw you to the side. And that is how you're going to use it to your advantage. What was the key to the resume's expectations in the late 80s to 90s? It was a full disclosure of your experience, period. And they wanted an objective listed, what you could do for the company. What took place and required a change in a resume and a writing approach was the advent of going from manual and electronic typewriters to word processors, and the delivery of the resume. Rather than being mailed or handed in person, it was transmitted electronically. In the mid-90s to today, the submission for jobs are easier, but obtaining the jobs are harder, and I'll explain that. This is a first kind of look at what a resume would look like back in the 80s. You know, you'd list an objective and the position you were looking for, and then you would start your employment. And it's chronological. This is a chronological type resume listing this information. And it would go through and tell each job chronologically in reverse where you worked and in detail what you did. Things in red, I did that on purpose because you could misspell things, and even spell check can miss it. And then after that, you had certifications, educations, and you were done. So in the 90s, when the internet was coming online, resumes changed. And although some people stuck with original formats, it took a little while to catch up. Since everything is electronic, I call this a rainbow resume. It's like, why not add color to it? Because you need yours to stand out. So everyone else at the time was sending just black and white resumes. And then you didn't really have an objective. You would just have the position you were seeking. If they were hiring for that position, you stated that position only. If there were multiple positions in that company you were applying for, then you would change your resume to reflect that. Here, summary bullets is something new. Whenever they have required bullets, things they require, then you should copy paste that directly in there if you have those qualifications, then, because they were looking for keyword search. And in the next page, you can separate out things by color, slightly different font, and a shorter blurb of what your job was. And then anything that was older than 10 to 20 years, some people say 10 years, some people say 20, I'll pick 15. You can just list your jobs and you can talk about them if they choose to. And again, I left things like this that you should write out completely instead of acronym, because not everyone knows the acronym. Okay, nowadays, especially, cover letters are used. So especially if it's a non-solicited seeking of employment, you should always include I call it a love letter. It's a cover letter. This is where you sell yourself to them. You tell them how good you are and how great it would be for them to take you on. And you list out specifically what you're able to bring to the table, and then you just, of course, put the means of contacting yourself. The next page is kind of a more modern resume, where this is an objective like in the beginning, in the 80s, but you're embedding it in the position you're seeking. So you're telling them, hey, I'm an all-minded, team-oriented player who can foster collaboration, and you tell them how great you are. And then the bullets are just separated a little differently. It's just easier for them to read, to get around. And so long as this matches keywords that they're looking for, it'll get you in the door. And this is just normal separation of a current one. And Microsoft has templates for resumes, for the most current resumes they want to see out there. And just to let you know, I went to a seminar at Brevard Workforce 2 days ago, and they're saying pretty much the same thing as you would hear on the radio, like John Tesh, Intelligence for Your Life, and the templates you would get, or professional resume writers. Is an employer will spend 10 to 30 seconds looking at your resume. If you can't catch their eye on the first page, it's off to the side. I know that because I was a manager on the hiring end, and there were two things. You had to catch my eye, and any employment, if there were gaps, I would highlight it, and then if I called you in for an interview, I would just ask you about it. You know, it's not definite out the door, but that's just something they want explained. And another thing Brevard Workforce recommended is that you create a business card for yourself. Microsoft Publisher has templates for all kinds of things, especially business cards. You just have your name and the things you're interested in doing and you're qualified for, and your contact information. This is in case you're out at dinner and you come across somebody that might be hiring and who has a resume on them. So if you have business cards made up, you just buy the business card paper and you print them off. Or there's a site called onnetonline.com, and you can get cards, if not free, virtually free, to do the same thing. So with all of that, the strengths for your resume and cover writing is with yourself, and you've got to sell yourself and market yourself in any industry you're in, and that's pretty much where I bring it at. And I want to thank everybody for coming in.
No problem. Good job.